Hello family, welcome to Stories by Tochi. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please subscribe and drop a like for us. This generosity would go a long way for us. Also share to family and friends. And please turn on post notification to stay tuned for more. Thank you as you do so. Now let's get into the story. When Ngozi first arrived in Enugu, the air itself seemed different. It smelled of roasted corn, exhaust fumes, and dreams that had not yet come true. The buses coughed their way down the busy roads, and the sound of hawkers filled the evening like music gone slightly off-key. She stepped out of the old Sienna her father had borrowed, clutching a small Ganamusko bag that held her entire teenage life. Some clothes, a Bible, a notebook, and the restless hope that this new city would open its arms to her. Her auntie, Ebra, stood by the gate of a yellow-painted bungalow, waving, her bright red headscarf glowing like a flag in the twilight. "No baby," she called, stretching her arms wide. The hug that followed was firm, warm, and full of unspoken expectations. Ebra was not a woman to waste words. Her handshake could make a liar confess, and her laughter, though rare, could fill a room. She had lived in Enugu long enough to understand that the city smiled at you only when you worked hard enough to earn it. "You will like it here," she said that first night, serving Ngozi a plate of rice and fried fish. "But you must learn fast. This is not the village. In Enugu, time moves like Danfo buses. If you miss it, it won't wait for you." Ngozi nodded, watching the ceiling fan spin above her, her mind already swimming with thoughts of what her new life might bring. The night air outside carried voices and laughter from the street, and she wondered how so many people could be awake at such an hour. She was used to the quiet hum of crickets in Nsukka, not the heartbeat of a city that never seemed to sleep. Yet beneath the noise, she felt something alive, something that made her chest flutter with both fear and curiosity. It was the kind of feeling that whispered, everything is about to change. The days that followed moved slowly, like raindrops tracing lazy paths down a window pane. Ngozi began to learn the rhythm of her new home. Every morning, Aunty Ebra left early for her shop in Abakba, leaving behind a list of chores written in neat, no-nonsense handwriting. Ngozi would sweep the front yard, wash the plates, and arrange the shop's records before heading out to school. The compound had other tenants: a mechanic who always sang high-life songs at dawn, a tailor whose sewing machine never seemed to rest, and a nurse who liked to gossip on her balcony while watering her flowers. They became the background music to Ngozi's life in Enugu. At school, she found herself both fascinated and intimidated. The girls wore their confidence like perfume, loud and sweet. They talked about makeup, parties, and phones that could take pictures sharper than reality itself. Ngozi, with her quiet eyes and hand-me-down school bag, often felt like a small pebble in a river of rushing water. Yet, she was not invisible. A few teachers noticed her neat handwriting, and one of them, Mrs. Okafor, often said, "Ngozi, you have the kind of mind that remembers everything but speaks little. That can be both a gift and a curse." After school, she would help in her auntie's shop, stacking cartons of milk and counting change for customers. Sometimes she caught Ebra watching her, as if trying to measure how quickly the girl was adapting to city life. At night, they would sit together on the balcony, watching the headlights streak through the streets like fireflies made of metal. Ebra would talk about how she'd built her business from nothing, how the city could eat you up if you didn't stay alert. "Enugu is like a mirror," she would say. "It shows you what you are made of. If you are lazy, it will expose you. If you are determined, it will lift you higher than you ever dreamed." Ngozi listened, her heart swelling with admiration and a hint of longing. She wanted to make her auntie proud, to be the kind of girl whose name brought smiles, not sighs. But even then, somewhere deep within her, a quiet restlessness began to stir, like a seed waiting for rain. One evening, after a long day at the shop, Ebra and Ngozi took a walk through the neighborhood. The air smelled of rain-soaked dust, and the sky was heavy with the promise of another storm. They passed street vendors roasting plantains over charcoal fires, the flames dancing like restless spirits. Children played football in the narrow street, shouting goal, with wild joy each time the ball touched a wall. Aunty Ebra stopped at a kiosk to buy airtime, chatting briefly with the owner, while Ngozi stood watching a teenage boy fixing a bicycle by the corner. He was tall, with rolled-up sleeves and a smile that came easily, as if he had never known trouble. He looked up briefly, their eyes met, and for a split second, something unspoken passed between them, like two strangers recognizing each other from a dream. But before the thought could grow legs, Ebra called out, "Ngozi, let's go." That night, lying on her narrow bed, Ngozi found herself replaying the moment again and again, though she didn't understand why. She told herself it was nothing, that it was just curiosity, but her mind refused to rest. Outside, thunder rumbled over Enugu like the growl of a restless sky. Inside her chest, something similar echoed, soft but certain. A feeling was taking root, something she couldn't yet name. As weeks turned into months, Ngozi settled into the rhythm of her new life, though the city continued to surprise her in ways she hadn't expected. She had learned to wake before dawn, to boil water for Ebra's bath, to greet every neighbor politely, and to balance the shop's accounts with accuracy. But sometimes, when the shop grew quiet and the sun slanted through the dusty windows, she would drift into thoughts of her parents back home, their laughter, their gentle voices calling her our city girl. She missed Nsukka, the smell of wet earth after rain, the lazy afternoons by the stream, the familiar faces that asked for nothing but her smile. Yet, she knew she couldn't go back. Enugu had already marked her in invisible ink. It had given her new habits, new fears, and new dreams. She began to write again, small notes in her old notebook, half poetry, half confession. The city has many eyes, one-page read, but only a few hearts. Sometimes, Aunty Ebra caught her staring into space and would say, "No, baby, your mind is always traveling. Don't get lost in thoughts. The city doesn't wait for dreamers." Ngozi would smile faintly, hiding the words she couldn't say. She didn't tell her auntie about the boy she saw fixing the bicycle that day, or how sometimes she still hoped to see him again. She didn't understand it herself. All she knew was that Enugu had begun to whisper to her in a language that wasn't entirely safe but was impossible to ignore. A promise, a warning, or perhaps both. And in that restless whisper, her story was only just beginning. The first time Ngozi spoke to Michael, the afternoon sun was leaning lazily against the sky, painting everything in shades of gold and dust. She had been sent by Aunty Ebra to buy sugar and detergent from a shop across the street. The air hummed with the usual noise of Enugu, hawkers shouting prices, motorbikes whining through traffic, and the smell of fried akara drifting like temptation through the air. As she crossed the road, her wrapper caught on a nail jutting out from a plank, making her lose grip of the polythene bag she held. The sachets of salt scattered across the pavement, and as she bent to gather them, a voice behind her said, "Let me help you, beautiful." She turned, startled, and saw a boy, maybe a few years older, crouched beside her. His smile was effortless, the kind that made strangers pause. His hands brushed against hers as they picked up the sachets, and Ngozi felt something flicker. Tiny but real, like the first drop before a storm. "Thank you," she said softly, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "You're welcome," he replied, studying her face as if memorizing it. "I'm Michael. I stay just around that corner." He pointed toward a row of low buildings where the walls wore peeling paint like old memories. She nodded shyly, unsure what else to say. When she finally walked away, her heart refused to return to its usual rhythm. That night, she kept hearing his voice in her head, replaying every word as if they carried meanings she hadn't yet learned. For the first time since coming to Enugu, she caught herself smiling at nothing. The city lights outside blinked like knowing eyes, and in the distance, a kiki horn wailed as if mocking her innocence. Days folded into each other, and before long, Michael became a familiar face. It started innocently. He would appear near the shop when she was sweeping the front, or wait by the junction pretending to buy roasted corn just as she passed by. Sometimes, he carried a book or a phone he rarely used, as though trying to convince the world he wasn't loitering. Ngozi pretended not to notice, but her eyes betrayed her every time. She found herself looking out for him, even when she didn't mean to. One afternoon, when Aunty Ebra went to the main market to restock, Michael strolled in front of the shop and greeted her with a grin. "Ngozi the quiet one," he teased. "You always look like you have secrets hidden behind those eyes." She laughed nervously. "Secrets? I don't have any." "Everybody has secrets," he said, leaning against a pole. "Maybe I'll find yours one day." There was something about the way he said it, half joke, half promise, that sent a shiver down her spine. She tried to remind herself of her auntie's warning. Men in the city often spoke with sugar on their tongues and stones in their hearts. But Michael didn't seem like the others. He listened when she spoke, even if she said little. He asked about her school, her dreams, her family. His words felt like warm cloth on a cold morning. Little by little, he slipped into her days, and she didn't notice when the longing to see him became routine. He began walking her partway home after school, buying her sachet water when the sun grew too harsh, and joking that if she smiled any brighter, Enugu's electricity problem would end. Her laughter came easily then. She was young, hopeful, and unaware that love, in cities like this, often started with laughter and ended with lessons. Michael's world, however, was not what it seemed. He lived in a one-room apartment shared with a cousin who was rarely home. He had finished secondary school, but had no job, no clear plan. He often spoke about big dreams, music, business, travel, but they floated like smoke, lovely to watch but impossible to hold. Still, Ngozi listened wide-eyed, convinced that one day he would surprise everyone. One evening, when she met him by the mango tree near the junction, he pulled her aside and said, "You know, you're different. Every other girl I've met only wants to take. You give peace." The words slipped through her heart like honey. That night she wrote in her notebook, "Michael says I give peace." Maybe that's what love is, to be someone's peace. The following week, he asked to borrow her small phone charger. A few days later, it was 500 Nigerian nairas just for transport. The requests were small at first, easy to justify. He always returned the items or paid back the money, sometimes late, but with apologies and laughter that made her forget. Gradually, his visits became the best part of her day. Sometimes he waited outside the shop with a bottle of malt for her, or brought cheap bangles he claimed he bought, just because I saw them and thought of you. When Aunty Ebra teased her about always smiling at her phone, Ngozi blushed so deeply she nearly dropped the crate she was carrying. The feeling was new, intoxicating, like sipping palm wine for the first time, sweet on the lips, dizzy in the head, dangerous if you drank too much. Then came the first lie. It was a Thursday afternoon, and clouds were gathering for rain. Michael told her he needed 2,000 Nigerian nairas to pay a friend who helped him print job applications. She hesitated. Her savings were barely enough for her school needs. "I'll return it next week," he promised, touching her hand in a way that made words dissolve in her throat. That evening, she took the money from her small purse and gave it to him, her heart thudding like it wanted to escape. When he smiled and said, "You're the only one I can count on," something inside her swelled with pride. But the money never came back. A week later, when she asked him about it, he sighed dramatically and spun another story. How his friend had disappointed him, how things were tough, how he was trying. Ngozi wanted to be angry, but instead she found herself comforting him, saying it was okay, even though it wasn't. That night, guilt curled up beside her in bed. She had lied to her auntie when asked about her missing 2,000 Nigerian nairas. It was the first small crack, invisible but real, like a hairline fracture in glass. The city outside continued its noisy rhythm, cars honking, neighbors laughing, but inside her chest, something quiet had shifted. She couldn't explain it, yet she knew that somehow, without meaning to, she had started walking a path that didn't lead home. The days that followed blurred into one another, like colors bleeding softly on wet paper. Michael had become a constant hum in Ngozi's thoughts, a sound she could no longer silence. Each time she saw him, her pulse seemed to dance to an uninvited rhythm, one she did not fully understand, but could not resist. He now visited her near the shop more often, always appearing at the right moment, when her auntie was away or when customers thinned out. Their conversations grew longer, and the world around her faded whenever he spoke. His voice carried a rhythm that soothed her doubts, and his words curled around her mind like smoke, leaving traces even after he had gone. He began to tell her stories of hardship, of how life had cheated him, how people took without giving. He said he was different, that he only wanted someone to believe in him. "Ngozi," he would say, "you have something other girls don't. You listen with your heart." And every time he said it, she felt seen in a way she had never been before. He painted his dreams in bold colors, owning a music studio, buying his mother a house, traveling abroad, and when she looked into his eyes, she saw not lies but desperation disguised as hope. One afternoon, he told her his cousin had been admitted to the hospital, and he needed money urgently. "Even 5,000 will help," he said, his voice heavy with worry. Ngozi felt her chest tighten. She had no such money, but the thought of him in pain tore at her conscience. That night, while her auntie was asleep, she sat on the edge of the bed and stared at Ebra's handbag resting carelessly on the stool. The bag seemed to watch her, daring her to do what she shouldn't. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it, whispering a silent prayer that this would be the first and last time. The next morning, she slipped the money into Michael's hands, and his gratitude came in the form of a hug that made her forget everything. But guilt is a patient visitor. It waited until nightfall to crawl back into her heart, whispering, "You've crossed a line that does not fade." Ebra began to sense that something was shifting beneath the surface of their quiet household. The laughter that once lit up Ngozi's face had become fleeting, replaced by absent-minded sighs and sudden silences. When asked simple questions, she answered too quickly, as if afraid her words might betray her. The shop's records, once neatly written, started showing small discrepancies. 2 cartons of milk missing here, a few bottles of drink unaccounted for there. Ebra's instincts, sharpened by years of trading and motherhood, told her something wasn't right. She began keeping an extra eye on her niece without making it obvious. One evening, she deliberately left some cash in the drawer and went out, pretending to visit a friend. Her steps were light, but her mind heavy with suspicion. When she returned unexpectedly an hour later, she found Ngozi rearranging goods with nervous haste. "How's business today?" Ebra asked, her tone deceptively calm. "Fine, Aunty," Ngozi replied, her voice too small. The air in the shop thickened, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Later that night, Ebra lay awake listening to the faint rustle of movement from Ngozi's room. She wanted to believe it was nothing, that perhaps she was being paranoid, but her gut refused to rest. In the following days, she noticed that Ngozi left the shop for longer breaks, sometimes claiming to have gone to buy stock or deliver goods. Ebra started marking her money discreetly with ink, folding each note in a particular way. When some disappeared and others reappeared unfolded, her heart sank. Still, she said nothing. She had seen enough of life to know that truth, when forced, tends to run. She decided to wait, to watch, to understand the whole picture before drawing her sword of anger. Meanwhile, Michael's demands grew bolder, like a vine that had found fertile ground. He started showing up with new clothes, saying a friend had given them to him, but Ngozi knew where some of that money came from, her auntie's hard-earned cash. Whenever she hesitated to help, he would grow moody, withdrawing affection like punishment. "You don't really care about me," he would say, eyes cast downward, voice breaking just enough to sound sincere. "When things were easy, you smiled. Now that I need you, you're turning away." Those words dug deep, cutting through her reason. She hated disappointing him. The thought of losing his love was unbearable. Soon, stealing became easier, almost mechanical. Each act began with trembling hands and ended with self-deception. She told herself she would replace the money, that she was just borrowing it. But deep inside, she knew that lies told to comfort guilt were only slow poisons. Her grades at school began to drop, her concentration scattered like dry leaves in harmattan wind. Teachers noticed her distraction, but she laughed it off. The girl who once wrote poetry in her notebook now scribbled Michael's name in the margins of her textbooks. Nights became sleepless marathons of remorse and daydreams. When Michael held her hand, the world steadied for a moment. When he turned away, everything felt hollow. She had given him pieces of herself, trust, honesty, even her peace. And he, like a skilled artist, took them and painted a picture of love that only looked beautiful from a distance. The day Enugu's rain came without warning, everything began to unravel. The storm hit hard, flooding gutters and washing dust off the streets. Ngozi waited for Michael near the mango tree, drenched and trembling, her school bag soaked through. He arrived late, laughing, holding an umbrella that barely covered them both. She tried to smile, but her heart was heavy. "Did you bring it?" he asked softly. She nodded, handing him a brown envelope with 10,000 naira inside. He took it quickly, eyes darting around. "You're my angel," he said, kissing her forehead. "You don't know how much this means." She wanted to ask what it was for, but his lips silenced her questions. Later that evening, when she returned home shivering, she found Ebra sitting by the table, her purse open, her expression unreadable. "Ngozi," she called gently. The tone carried no anger, only fatigue. "Come and sit." Ngozi froze. Her heart raced, pounding so loudly she feared her auntie could hear it. Ebra stared at her for a long time before speaking again. "Tell me the truth. Is there something you're not telling me?" The air between them thickened with unsaid words. Ngozi wanted to confess everything, to pour out the shame sitting heavy on her chest. But fear clamped her lips shut. "No, Auntie," she whispered. "Nothing." Ebra nodded slowly, her eyes dim but searching. "All right," she said, standing up. "I'm watching." When Ngozi went to bed that night, she wept quietly into her pillow, the sound of rain outside matching the rhythm of her guilt. She knew the truth was catching up like thunder following lightning, and soon there would be nowhere left to hide. Ebra had lived long enough in Enugu to know that truth often hides in the smallest details. The shop she ran was not just a business, it was an extension of her soul, a symbol of every sweat-stained morning she had survived. When her money began disappearing like water leaking from a clay pot, she did not react in haste. Instead, she chose silence, the kind that listens before it speaks. In her youth, she had learned that anger burns fast, but patience cooks the truth slowly. Each morning, she counted her earnings, memorizing the texture of the notes, the exact folds, the smell of metal on her coins. Then she would place them carefully in her bag, pretending not to notice the soft, nervous glances Ngozi gave each time she closed it. The girl who once hummed cheerfully while arranging shelves now moved like someone carrying a heavy secret. Ebra watched in silence, the way a hawk studies a chick too close to the edge of a cliff. Sometimes she wanted to ask directly, but her mother's voice echoed in her mind. When the wind reveals a snake, you don't chase it, you watch where it crawls. So, she began to set small traps. One day, she left a few notes in the drawer, arranging them in perfect order. Another day, she placed marked bills in her purse and tucked it halfway under the table, pretending to forget it. She even left her keys carelessly on the counter. Every evening, she returned to check. The changes were subtle at first, a note missing, a crease smoothed out, a coin misplaced. To others, it might have meant nothing, but to Ebra, each sign whispered a truth too painful to ignore. At night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling fan, thinking of her late sister, Ngozi's mother. "If you were alive," she murmured into the dark, "how would I tell you that your daughter is sinking into shadows?" Ngozi, on her part, was fighting an invisible war. The once simple act of waking up now carried the weight of dread. She felt like a stranger in her own skin, haunted by guilt that refused to sleep. Michael's calls came more often, his words dripping with sweetness and need. He spoke as though her love could fix his world, as though she owed him the happiness he couldn't create for himself. "You're all I have," he would say, and each time, her resolve melted a little more. The money she gave him never seemed enough. Every new excuse sounded urgent, each one laced with desperation. She told herself she was helping him, that one day he would pay her back, that she was doing what love demanded. But deep inside, she knew she was building her ruin brick by brick. Her heart raced each time her auntie called her name. Her palms grew clammy whenever Ebra opened her purse. She started avoiding her gaze, speaking less, eating in silence. Schoolwork became background noise to her anxiety. Even her friends noticed her withdrawal. "Ngozi, you day okay?" one asked during lunch break, but she simply smiled and changed the topic. She spent hours daydreaming about escaping with Michael, away from the accusing walls of the house, away from the fear that followed her like a stubborn shadow. Yet, reality clung tightly. Her auntie's face, her parents' trust, her own conscience, each weighed heavily on her heart. Sleep came in fragments. When she dreamed, she saw herself running through endless corridors, chased by something she could not name. Sometimes she thought of confessing, but the thought of Michael leaving her froze her courage. Love, she realized too late, could be both shelter and storm. One Thursday evening, the sky threatened rain again, and the air carried that peculiar smell of dust and ozone that always came before a storm. Ebra told Ngozi she would be returning late from the market and handed her the shop keys. "Close early," she said, "and don't let anyone distract you." Ngozi nodded, trying to sound steady. As soon as her auntie left, her phone buzzed. It was Michael. "Babe, I'm in a tight spot," he began, his voice low and urgent. "Please, I need just 7,000 Nigerian nairas to sort something out tonight. I'll pay you tomorrow morning." Her throat went dry. "Michael, I don't have that kind of money again," she whispered. He sighed, the sound heavy with disappointment. "I thought you loved me. But it's fine. Maybe I was wrong." The silence that followed was louder than any argument. Ngozi's chest tightened, her heartbeat drummed against her ribs. She looked at her auntie's bag resting by the counter. It was as if the bag was calling her name. The air thickened with temptation and fear. She hesitated, pacing, whispering prayers she did not mean. Finally, she reached for the bag. Her hands shook as she unzipped it, eyes darting toward the door. She pulled out the money, heart pounding like a drum of war. At that moment, thunder cracked outside, startling her so much that the notes fell to the floor. She gathered them quickly, stuffing them into her pocket, unaware that eyes were already watching. For Ebra, who had returned quietly, the truth had arrived uninvited. From the shop's doorway, she stood frozen, her heart breaking even before the confrontation began. For a long, unbearable moment, silence filled the room like thick smoke. Ngozi didn't notice her auntie until the woman spoke, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through the air. "What are you doing, Ngozi?" The girl spun around, her face draining of color. The money slipped from her fingers and scattered across the floor. "Auntie, it's not what you think," she stammered, but her trembling betrayed her. Ebra stepped forward slowly, every inch of her body trembling, not with anger but with sorrow. "Not what I think," she repeated softly, her voice cracking. "I have watched you. I wanted to believe I was wrong. But the truth doesn't hide forever." Tears welled in Ngozi's eyes, hot and blinding. "Please, Aunty, I'm sorry," she cried, falling to her knees. "It's Michael," he said. "Stop!" Ebra snapped, the sound sharp as lightning. "Don't say his name. Don't blame anyone for what you chose to do." Her words landed like blows, not meant to wound but to wake. The storm outside broke open, rain hammering the roof in fury. For a while, only the sound of water filled the silence. Ebra bent down, picked up the scattered notes, and placed them back in her bag. "Pack your things tonight," she said finally, her tone steady but hollow. "Tomorrow, you'll go back to your parents. I have no strength left to fight this battle." Ngozi wept harder, reaching for her auntie's hand, but Ebra turned away. "You were the daughter I never had," she whispered, her voice trembling, "and yet you've broken something I don't know how to fix." The rain outside blurred the world beyond the shop, but inside, two hearts stood shattered in a space too small for forgiveness. And as the night deepened, the city of Enugu seemed to fall silent, mourning quietly with them. The morning Ngozi left Enugu, the sky carried a colorless heaviness that matched her heart. She sat at the back of the bus, her eyes fixed on nothing as the city blurred into streaks of gray and red dust. Aunty Ebra hadn't said a word since dawn. They rode in silence, the air between them thick with unspoken grief. Ebra's hands rested on her lap, stiff and still, the way a woman holds herself when her heart has cracked but pride won't let it show. Ngozi wanted to speak, to beg for forgiveness one more time, but her throat felt like it had swallowed stones. When the bus turned onto the old highway toward Nsukka, she realized she was leaving behind not just a city, but the version of herself that believed love could excuse wrongdoing. At the station, her parents were already waiting. Her mother's wrapper was tied carelessly, her father's face hollow with disappointment. The hug she expected did not come. Her mother looked at her, eyes swollen from crying. "Ngozi," she said softly, "what have you done?" The words hit harder than any slap. Aunty Ebra explained everything in a voice stripped of emotion, each sentence landing like judgment. The silence that followed was unbearable. Her father's hands trembled slightly as he nodded. "Thank you, Ebra," he said, his voice weary. "We will handle it from here." When the car pulled away, Ngozi watched her auntie through the window, her figure shrinking until it disappeared. Something inside her twisted painfully. The shame was too loud to think, too heavy to carry. At home, her siblings avoided her eyes, whispering when she passed. The compound that once felt warm now felt like a courtroom. Even the family dog barked less, as though the atmosphere had thickened with sorrow. That night, as her mother's quiet sobs echoed through the small house, Ngozi lay on her mat, staring into the darkness, wishing she could fold herself into it and vanish. The days that followed were like slow rain, steady, relentless, washing away everything familiar. Her father didn't speak much. He moved through the house like a ghost in his own life. When he did look at her, his gaze carried a sadness deeper than anger. Her mother's silence hurt even more. She went about her chores without words, her face a mask of exhaustion. Once, Ngozi tried to help in the kitchen, but her mother simply said, "Go and read your Bible." That simple sentence pierced deeper than any rebuke. Outside, neighbors whispered. Word travels faster than wind in Nsukka, and soon everyone seemed to know. "That's the girl who stole from her auntie," someone murmured at the market. Each time she heard it, she walked faster, her eyes fixed on the ground. The shame became her second skin. She avoided old friends, choosing solitude over pity. At night, she wrote in her worn notebook, words spilling out like confession. "I wanted love," one line read, "but I lost myself instead." Sometimes, she thought of Michael and felt anger bubbling under her ribs, anger at his smooth lies, at her foolish heart, at the way she traded her dignity for the illusion of affection. Yet part of her still longed to hear from him, to believe that it hadn't all been manipulation. Days turned into weeks, and the silence from Enugu stretched like an open wound. The number she used to call him no longer connected. She wondered if he'd found someone else to replace her, someone naive enough to believe his honeyed words. Each morning she prayed for courage, and each night she begged God for sleep that didn't bring memories. Slowly, her mother began to speak again, not about the incident, but about chores, errands, small things. It was her quiet way of saying, "I still love you, but I'm still hurt." Ngozi clung to that faint grace like a drowning person to driftwood. One evening, a letter arrived, carried by a young man who said it came from Enugu. Her mother handed it to her wordlessly, suspicion flickering in her eyes. Ngozi's hands trembled as she unfolded the paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. Michael. Her heart lurched before she began to read. The letter was brief, its tone oddly calm. "I'm sorry for everything," it began. "I didn't mean for things to go this far. I thought it was just fun at first, but it got out of hand. Please forgive me. Don't look for me. I'm leaving Enugu for good." There was no apology deep enough to undo what had been done, no warmth in his words, just emptiness. Ngozi read it twice, then a third time, as though the meaning might change if she stared long enough. But it didn't. The truth was bare, she had been used. The boy she thought she loved had seen her as a game. A slow, shaking anger began to replace the tears. For the first time, she understood what her auntie meant when she said the city tests the soul. It wasn't the buildings or the noise, it was the people, the choices, the lies that looked like kindness. She tore the letter into tiny pieces, each rip echoing like release. That night, when her mother found her burning the scraps behind the kitchen, she said nothing. She simply watched her daughter in silence, the firelight reflecting off eyes too tired to cry. When the last piece turned to ash, Ngozi whispered, "No more." It wasn't loud, but her mother heard it, and for the first time in weeks, she reached out and touched her shoulder. Life did not return to normal overnight. Healing, Ngozi learned, moved slower than guilt. But each day she woke a little lighter. She began helping her mother again, fetching water, grinding pepper, sweeping the compound. Her father still rarely spoke, yet one morning he handed her a small Bible and said, "Start again." It wasn't forgiveness in full, but it was a beginning. She enrolled in a nearby community school, avoiding the curious stares of those who remembered her fall. The classroom became her sanctuary, a place where silence meant peace, not punishment. Slowly, she began to find her voice again, though quieter, wiser. Sometimes she would see young men loitering by the roadside, their laughter too familiar, their words too smooth, and she would look away, her heart steady. One Sunday afternoon, while helping her mother hang laundry, she saw a group of girls giggling over a phone. On the screen was a photo of Michael, posted by someone new, smiling as if he'd never broken anyone. For a moment, her chest tightened, but then she exhaled and turned away. The past was a wound, yes, but it no longer bled. She had learned that love without respect is just hunger wearing perfume. As the sun dipped behind the hills, she wiped her hands on her wrapper and smiled faintly. Enugu felt far away now, like a dream she had finally woken from. The hurt had not vanished, but it no longer owned her. For the first time in a long while, she felt something she thought she'd lost forever, peace that did not depend on anyone's voice but her own. The harmattan season crept in quietly, softening the air in Sukka with its dry, whispering wind. Ngozi had grown thinner but stronger, her eyes carrying both the sadness of what was lost and the calm of what had been learned. Each morning, she walked to the community school with her notebooks pressed to her chest, her steps steady, her spirit quieter. The path wound past narrow streets lined with almond trees, past women frying puff-puff at the roadside, past old men reading newspapers they barely believed. The smell of charcoal smoke mingled with the crisp morning chill, and somewhere far off, a church bell rang. Life had returned to its rhythm, even if hers had changed forever. Her parents, though still cautious, had begun to trust her again, in small gestures, a smile from her father, an extra helping of stew from her mother. These tiny mercies meant more to her than words ever could. Sometimes she caught her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the girl staring back. The naive child who had once believed love was measured by what she could give away. That girl was gone, replaced by someone who now understood the price of blind affection. The village boys still tried to talk to her, their compliments floating like feathers in the wind, but she simply smiled politely and kept walking. She had no bitterness in her heart, only a quiet understanding that not every smile hides sincerity. One afternoon, while helping her mother at the market, she overheard two women gossiping about a young girl in town who had run off with a man from the city. Their words carried the same mixture of pity and scorn that used to follow her name, and for a fleeting moment, pain flared in her chest. But instead of shrinking, she straightened her shoulders and whispered a prayer for the girl, knowing too well how easy it was to fall and how hard it was to stand again. With time, the silence between Ngozi and her aunt softened into forgiveness. It began one morning when the postman brought a letter from Enugu. The handwriting on the envelope was bold, familiar, and made her hands tremble before she even opened it. Aunty Ebra's words were brief but warm, written with care that softened each syllable. "No, baby," it began. "I hope you are well. I was angry, but not forever. Anger is smoke, it fades and love remains. I miss your laughter. The shop feels too quiet without you. I know you have learned your lesson. Write to me when you can." Ngozi read the letter aloud to her parents, her voice breaking halfway through. Her mother's eyes glistened, and even her father cleared his throat awkwardly before nodding. That evening, Ngozi sat on the veranda with a pen and paper, the smell of roasted yam drifting through the air. She began her reply slowly, carefully choosing her words. "Aunty," she wrote, "I am sorry, not just for the money, but for breaking your trust. I wish I could go back, but since I cannot, I will do better moving forward. I pray you can smile when you think of me again." When she finished, she folded the paper neatly and handed it to her father to post. The next morning, she woke early, her heart lighter than it had been in months. The act of writing had unburdened her soul, like cleaning a wound that had been left too long unattended. For the first time since leaving Enugu, she felt the stirrings of hope, a small, steady flame that flickered but refused to die. Days later, she received another letter from Ebra, this one shorter, ending with four simple words. "You are forgiven, no baby." Those words became her new prayer, whispered each night before sleep. Months rolled by, each day smoothing the edges of her pain. Michael was now a distant memory, more ghost than man, more lesson than love. Occasionally, his name surfaced in whispered rumors. Someone said he had been seen in Onitsha. Another swore he'd joined a group of traders traveling to Lagos. But Ngozi no longer flinched when she heard it. The hold he once had over her had dissolved like sugar in rain. One Sunday after church, a young teacher named Chuka approached her. He was quiet-spoken, respectful, with eyes that held kindness rather than charm. They talked briefly about school, about books, about faith, and when he smiled, it was the kind of smile that didn't demand anything in return. For a moment, she felt a strange peace, not the dizzy rush of desire, but a calm acceptance that not all affection was meant to consume. As he walked away, her mother, who had been watching from a distance, teased softly, "That one looks like he reads more than he talks." Ngozi laughed, the sound free and genuine, echoing into the afternoon. It wasn't love, not yet, but it reminded her that her heart could still feel warmth without fear. Later, she would write about it in her notebook, the same one that once carried her guilt. Her words flowed with quiet strength. Healing is not forgetting. It is remembering without pain. She closed the book, exhaled deeply, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to dream again. Not of escape, but of becoming someone her younger self would have been proud of. By the time the new year arrived, the dust had settled on the past like an old photograph tucked away in a drawer. Ngozi had begun volunteering at the local library after school, helping younger children learn to read. Their laughter filled the room like sunlight, and every time one of them sounded out a word correctly, she felt a joy she couldn't explain. Perhaps this was what purpose felt like, a quiet sense of belonging that didn't rely on anyone's approval. On her way home each day, she passed the church at the hilltop and sometimes stopped to sit under the mango tree nearby. The same kind of tree where she had first met Michael in Enugu, but here, it no longer haunted her. Instead, it felt like closure, a symbol of how far she had come. She often thought of writing her story one day, not for pity, but to remind other girls that mistakes don't define the end of a life. They simply redirect it. One afternoon, while sitting under that mango tree, she felt the wind pick up, scattering dry leaves around her feet. The world smelled of dust and renewal. She looked up at the sky and smiled, whispering softly to no one in particular, "I'm free." And indeed she was. The past had lost its power, and the girl who once trembled in fear now stood firmly in her own light. The city had given her scars, yes, but the village had taught her healing. And between those two worlds, she had finally found herself, stronger, wiser, and whole again. Life will test your heart in ways you never expect. Sometimes, the people you love the most will be the ones who push you toward mistakes that change you forever. But never forget, your worth is not measured by how much you give away to be loved. Guard your peace like treasure, choose people who bring out your light, and when you fall, don't stay there. Rise, learn, heal. The world may judge your scars, but those scars are proof that you survived what tried to destroy you. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the lessons hidden inside pain. We thank you for second chances, for mercy that speaks louder than our mistakes. Lord, bless every heart listening right now. Heal the ones carrying guilt, strengthen the ones who feel forgotten, and remind them that redemption is never too far. May every broken trust be restored in your time, may every wounded soul find peace again, and may love return to them in its truest form, pure, patient, and kind. Let their paths be guided by wisdom, their hearts guarded by grace, and their days filled with light that never fades. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen, amen, and amen. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Turn on post notifications. See you on our next story.